Hey, what's up everyone? A longtime viewer of the channel was kind enough to send in this Nighthawk drop-in trigger system for me to take a look at and make a video about. This gentleman frequently asks great questions and contributes in a meaningful way to the awesome conversations that take place in the comment section of my videos. So, huge shout out to Devilish Details. I really appreciate this cool opportunity and I hope you all appreciate this video. We got a lot to cover. Theory and operation of this system, its design and construction. I'll take it apart and analyze the Sear and hammer geometry and engagement relationship. I'll test it with different mainspring weights. I will compare it to one of my trigger jobs and give my thoughts and opinions. I will leave a link in the description to my 1911 trigger system demonstration video. If you haven't seen it or need a refresher, I would recommend checking that out. It's only a few minutes long and it may help you understand some of the relationships I mentioned in this video. This is going to be a fun one. Let's get into it. This drop-in trigger system for 1911 replaces the Sear, hammer strut, and disc connector. The function of the left and middle Sear spring leaves are housed within this unit. It will use your existing mainspring. It comes with a little single spring tang for the grip safety if you have one in your pistol, and it is retained in the pistol by the standard hammer and Sear pins. It's compatible with Series 70 and Series 80 pistols. In a Series 80 pistol, the two firing pin block actuation levers would just sit outside the housing in their normal position in the frame. This is also compatible with short safety pistols, which is a firing pin block actuated by the grip safety, and it should work with double stack pistols if they use one of the conventional trigger systems previously mentioned. Other than that, it works in the same manner as a standard 1911 trigger system, which I show in detail in the video I've linked to in the description. The middle Sear spring tang is replaced by this little guy right here. It pushes the disc connector up into the pocket in the bottom of the slide, and it pushes it forward into the back of the trigger bow. The left Sear spring tang is replaced by a ball and a coil spring, which is housed in this little block right here on the other side of this set screw. It's a bit hard to see, so I've drawn it here. The coil spring and ball push the bottom of the Sear forward, pivoting the tip of the Sear into engagement with the hammer hooks. There's a notch cut in the Sear where the ball contacts, then the other side is a conventional profile for interaction with the thumb safety lug. The hammer strut interacts with the mainspring and mainspring plunger as it does in a standard trigger system. Installation is simple. You get the disc connector tip here to pop up through the hole in the frame, and then you just line up your pinholes, drop your pins through like so, install the grip safety spring if needed. Then you would install the mainspring housing and pin like you normally would. Cock the hammer and check if the thumb safety needs adjustment to the Sear. Install the thumb safety, grip safety, and or beaver tail. And then you just do your normal safety and function checks. A link to my video covering those is in the description as well. Minimal fitting should be required, but the safety function needs to be checked and possibly adjusted. There's a window here for the lug of the thumb safety to come through and block the Sear as it would in a normal 1911 ignition system. You can see that part of the Sear I have colored red right there. The thumb safety lug, colored red here, may need to be adjusted upon installation. In the worst case scenario, you might engage the thumb safety, but that doesn't prevent the Sear from pivoting enough to release the hammer. If that were the case, you would need to fit a new thumb safety to the pistol and the Sear in this unit. This unit is retained in the pistol with the standard Sear and hammer pins. They go through the bushings that the Sear and hammer pivot around. The Sear pinhole is 114 thousandths diameter. Spec is 110 to 112. This is oversized by 2 thou. The hammer pinhole is 160. Spec is 0.1575 to 0.159. So this is oversized by 1 thou. I'll measure the bushing to Sear and hammer relationships when I get this thing apart later in the video. So another benefit of this system is that the relationship of the Sear to the hammer is set inside this unit and does not rely on the hammer and sear pinholes drilled in the frame of the pistol. The oversized holes in this unit can account for variation in pinhole size and spacing and parallelism in the frame. If you had a really wonky frame with pinholes that were oversized or non-parallel, this may be a good option to remedy that, because it would be really hard to get a good trigger job out of that pistol if the pinholes in the frame were way off. The hammer and sear are necessarily narrower than standard because of this laser cut and bent piece of stainless steel that houses them, that also, takes up some of this space in the frame. All the internal components appear to be billet and the machining quality is very nice. The construction, fit, and finish of this unit is good. The block that houses a coil spring, ball, and set screw for the sear is laser welded into the housing. Let's look at this weld under a microscope because it's pretty, like a little stack of dimes. Now, there is a set screw here, and that would adjust preload on the coil spring pushing the ball into the back of the sear. This would affect trigger break weight. This is not to be adjusted. It's set from the factory and marked, and I would imagine the adjustment is quite precise. It would probably lead to an unsafe condition due to inadequate sear engagement if this were adjusted for a lower break weight. This probably would result in hammer follow. I would guess it's actually more for ease of assembly. The disconnector spring rides on this pin right here, and this pin is staked in place into the housing and not removable. This unit will be installed in your pistol with the existing mainspring. So I wanted to test how much mainspring weight affects trigger break weight. I've done nothing to this drop-in trigger unit other than install it and lubricate it. With a 17-pound mainspring, the break weight is 3 pounds. Right around 3 pounds with a 19-pound mainspring. Right around 3 pounds with a 21-pound mainspring. The break weight with a standard 23-pound mainspring is just a smidge above 3 pounds. I set this trigger at a 3-pound break weight with a 17-pound mainspring. I've installed a 23-pound mainspring, and we'll see what the break weight is so we can kind of get a frame of reference. About 3.5 pounds, so maybe about a half-pound increase. It's not much. So it seems like this trigger unit is not very sensitive to mainspring weight changes. I kind of expected there would be a little bit more variability than that. Nighthawk also claims that the break weight of this trigger is going to be somewhere around 3 3/4 to 4 pounds. This one seems to be a bit lower than that, kind of regardless of mainspring weight. My sear and hammer geometry and engagement relationship have been established for this trigger job. I have minimal engagement for a very crisp trigger, and the trigger break will be 3.5 pounds in this pistol. I have temporarily adjusted the sear spring for a 3-pound break with a 17-pound mainspring to match the Nighthawk unit. The amount of sear engagement I have with the hammer hooks is still appropriate for a 3-pound trigger in my opinion. This trigger setup is based on my preference for a 3-pound trigger. Please remember, when I'm comparing the Nighthawk unit and my trigger, this is based on my preference for trigger action, and that's largely subjective. I have adjusted pre-travel and over-travel at the trigger bow and shoe to a reasonable level and will not adjust them between tests. All parts were installed and lubricated in the same manner. The take-up weight is right around 1 1/4 pounds. I want my take-up weight for all trigger break weights to be 1 1/4 to 1.5 pounds. The take-up is very smooth, the wall is firm and well-defined. The break is crisp. As I said, I had it adjusted to right around 3 pounds. The reset is short and positive. This Nighthawk trigger has about a 2-pound take-up. This is heavier than I like. It feels smooth. The wall is firm and well-defined. The brake is right at 3 pounds, but it feels lighter because the take-up is heavier. My trigger has a 1.25 pound take-up and another 1.75 pound brake for a total of 3 pounds. This has a 2 pound take-up and another 1 pound brake for a total of 3 pounds. This is not really my preference. The reset, short and positive. The brake is crisp. I can't perceive any creep in it. In that comparison, you may have noticed that the reset distance on my trigger was longer than on the Nighthawk trigger. And that just has to do with where the sear and disconnector are in relation to each other and in relation to the trigger bow inside the pistol. And there's a difference there for this given adjustment of the over travel screw. So I can take more over travel out of my trigger and shorten up the reset as well. But just in this case, with this particular adjustment, the Nighthawk had a shorter reset. All right, got this thing taken apart. Here you can see the staked in pin and the disconnector spring still in the housing. The bushing that goes through the sear and the disconnector is flared on both ends, so I'm not really going to take it out of there or take this apart anymore. Here is the spring and the little ball for the sear, and you can see this part of the sear interacts with the thumb safety, and then this part of the sear right here is notched out for that spring plunger. This is the bushing for the hammer. Hammer pin goes through the center here. The OD of this is 234. This is 235 and a half, so very nice tight fit between the hammer and the bushing that they have here. Due to the hammer and sear being thinner than normal, I had to shim them up in my jig with a feeler gauge. This would keep them in the same focal plane at the same magnification level as the image of my calibration slide I used to set the scale in my image analyzing software. Please keep in mind that my measurement accuracy for lengths is around plus or minus 1 thou and plus or minus 1 degree for angles. The hammer hooks are 90 degrees and about 18 thou long. I cut my hammer hooks to 20 thou and I consider 18 thou the absolute minimum. The sear primary face is pretty narrow at 14 thou. I like mine around 20 thou. The engagement depth is about 10 thou. That is also the minimum I run and what I set my engagement depth to in the trigger job I used for comparison in this video. The engagement angle is around 10 degrees. This is maybe slightly on the positive side of the engagement angle formed by the standard sear primary face angle and 90-degree hammer hooks. I generally cut my sear primary face about 2 to 4 degrees more positive than this one for this engagement depth and break weight. It makes sense that the primary face needed to be that narrow to get the 10 thou engagement with the shorter hammer hooks. This geometry indeed produces a very crisp trigger. This also means the adjustment of that sear spring preload is even more critical and why you really shouldn't try to adjust it. And it makes sense that the mainspring weight wouldn't affect this brake weight very much. I would recommend running a 21 or 23 pound mainspring with this trigger system to keep more pressure on that sear and hammer hook interface if it doesn't affect the brake weight. I'm not affiliated with Nighthawk in any way. I didn't pay any money for this. A viewer sent it in and I'm sending it back when I'm done. The following opinions are my own. I think this is a cool product. I am generally impressed with it. I think it's a cool design and it's well executed. I think it produces a crisp brake with other favorable characteristics commonly associated with the single action 1911 trigger. I think this is a good option to improve the trigger on a 1911 if you're not comfortable cutting sears and hammer hooks and establishing their engagement relationship or adjusting sear springs yourself. Most budget 1911s and 2011s, like the Prodigy, the Turkish pistols, lower end Springfields, etc., could benefit from this trigger system. Most of the sub $1,000 1911s I've gotten my hands on have worse trigger actions than what this produces. The only issue I have with this trigger action, and remember this is subjective and just based on my preferences, is the heavier take-up weight. I think this is a reasonable value for the price tag of around $250. Two improvements I would like to see. One, a better finish on some of these internal components. I'd like to see a little polishing on the disconnector, especially where this spring contacts it, and the Sear face and hammer hooks. 2, I would like to see this spring and pin be removable. It would be really cool if this system came with a couple of these springs to adjust the take-up weight and reset positivity to the customer's liking. Then again, user adjustment like that may make it a little bit less of a drop-in system. Anyways, that's it for this video. Leave your thoughts, questions, and experiences with this product in the comments. I hope this was informative, interesting, or helpful to you in some way. Now, I need to put this thing back together so I can send it back to its owner. Once again, huge thanks to him for sending it in. I'm gonna polish it up for him before I reassemble it. And no, I won't show you how to take it apart and polish it. It's a drop-in system, drop it in, go use it. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.